But this has been a really good concise intro for us. Now, I think our intention here was to just have a little bit of a sort of conversational introduction here. Now, I invite you, Sachin. You and I you've worked out a little bit of a presentation for us so that, we've given, especially to my Western audience, a real good sense of what a sort of almost we would call a symbolic. We're working through the Western linguistic model of a symbolic grasp of Rahu and Ketu, and especially what they mean in the context of yoga. Now, I wonder if you've made a presentation that's going to give us a little bit of Indian literature's classic mythos that the Vedas have built upon in order to convey this meaning of Rahu and Ketu. And there are a few of them. I think that the one that we centered on to talk about today is Swarbhanu, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm thinking, Sachin, that we can start moving towards your presentation. Is there anything else that you'd like to convey before we start doing that?
I think let's speak through the presentation. Let's utilize the presentation to guide us.
Perfect. Perfect. Please feel free, Sachin.
Right. So
I knew our introduction would go for a long time. That's the story of my life. But I enjoy talking about this stuff so much.
Yeah, I think it's fun to be it's also nice to just have a foundation, stronger foundation, so we can build up on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we've talked about what we're going to talk about. Now we're going to talk about it.
Yeah. I just want to...
No worries.
Share screen and share this. Yeah.
Perfect.
Here we have a beautiful image of a serpent. And that's the symbol of desire. It's been mystified a lot in various cultures. It's one of the oldest symbols because the serpent being the most primitive aspect of our brain. It's the most primitive aspect of our psyche. So it's one of the oldest symbols we have.
Mm.
And this is where the roots of life are, life as we know it, the shadowy, beastly, desirous nature of the world, and desire not being desire being bad, but desire in the sense of this hungry craving for things in the sense which is destructive, not creative, not productive in any way, which we know would destroys us in ways that we don't understand. That's the serpent energy. Plus, it has this divine meaning of the Kundalini force, and that has its own spiritual import, which I feel must be, one must engage learning about those sorts of things from a different source. I'm not the right source for that. So we'll move into the presentation now, and we'll talk about, we've divided the presentation in these three parts. We'll talk about the tale of Swarbhanu. The word for tale is katha. We use the word katha in Sanskrit, which means narrative, which means story. So the symbolic significance of the tale we'll talk about. From that, we'll derive the symbols, and then we'll talk about the practical implications of the tale. And that would be an interesting part, how to apply these sorts of things, how to use them. So let's move in further. So we have here the tale of Swarbhanu. So I've started from a certain point within the tale. The tale is a very long tale, and it's one of the most important tales. It's let's say, if there has to be one of the most important tales in India, alongside, let's say, Mahabharata and Ramayana, it's this tale. The tale of Swarbhanu.
It's a real center.
And it's a smaller tale, but it has these so many symbols, and each of these symbols takes you to... That's the beauty of Indian literature. It's it's like an endless series of Harry Potters. It's like a million Harry Potters, but like they're very like complexly interconnected. Like you find you're reading one tale and there's this one symbol arises, which the symbol is connected to another tale in another book.
Right.
And it's so dynamic. The beauty of astrology, especially Jyotisha, is that we contextualize the symbols. So it's not tarot. Astrology, as we see, as Jyotishis, is not just symbolic tarot. I can do tarot with anything. Like I can create symbolic things and I can ask you to choose between a pen and a mug and an empty bottle of water. And that means something. Why your psyche picked one of those. If you're like, I'd pick the mug, but I can just ask you, are you thirsty? Do you want to drink something? Probably have an unconscious motivation to drink something. If you pick up the pen, I can say like, okay, you want to write something? Do you have something to say?
Beautiful.
Or are you taking down notes of some sort? Are you noticing something that you want to take down? So symbols, metaphors can be used in beautiful ways, and our unconscious mind responds to them in beautiful ways. But Jyotisha is what contextualizes them. So that's why we are using Jyotisha, and then we apply the Tale of Swarbhanu and how it relates to you. Not Tale of Swarbhanu, how it relates to everyone on earth, but your specific moon, your psyche, which has its own Rahu and Ketu, which is Swarbhanu. Right? So symbols get contextualized, and that's super important. And this tale is one of the most important tales for many reasons, many reasons. So the gods and the demigods can be a bad translation, but that's one of the best translations we have of asuras. That's one of the closest way to understand them.
Because they are a part of us.
They are essentially both gods and demigods are a part of our own being, which is the shadow aspects, the darker side of ourselves, and the bright goodness within us, the more noble qualities, as they say,
the
virtues. And the gods and the demigods need to churn the ocean of consciousness. They need to churn because something has happened, and I'm picking up the story from the middle, to produce the nectar of immortality. So this story is called Samudra Manthan. And that's the Sanskrit I've written here, Samudra Manthan, which is churning the ocean. Samudra Manthan means to churn. Samudra means ocean.
And then
so we're churning the ocean of consciousness. And that's how we're using the symbol to produce the nectar of immortality, to save the devas from losing their power to the asuras.
Wonderful. I almost see an alchemical metaphor of dealing with lead and other various baser metals, but turning the gold, the nectar of immortality, out of the sum of elements. You know, the magic, the real magic is when you make 1 + 1 = 3.
And the interesting bit is that those alchemical formulas are an unconscious fascination of the psyche, which these archetypal tales reveal to us.
Yes.
In medieval period, in medieval periods, we had this alchemy of trying to turn lead to gold. And then there are modern interpretations of the alchemy of like how it was actually something symbolic, but actually it's an unconscious fascination. And you can find this sort of fascination even within a tribe that has not studied or read anything, that is complete disconnected tribes. So you see this theme coming up within the collective unconscious.
I like to call it perennial. Like I mentioned that when you see a certain plant growing in the forest, it grows there every year at the same place. Winter comes and it disappears, but when you go there in the summer, it's going to be there in the same place again. So in the same way, this is perennial knowledge that's always going to be relevant to human consciousness.
Exactly. And so now we move into Dhanvantri, the medicine god arises with the nectar. So the churning happens, a lot of drama happens during the churning. Finally, the Dhanvantri comes. And immediately the asuras, being asuras, snatch the pot. So because this is also symbolic, snatching, greediness, it comes from a fear of there isn't enough in the universe. It
There's not
comes
enough
from
on Earth.
what we call in law of attraction circles, poverty consciousness. That's an asura nature.
Wonderful.
So grabbing, right? So we say Vishnu, the preserver, seeing this manifests into Mohini, the most beautiful one. So Mohin means attractive, and Moha means illusion. So she creates that illusion. She creates a Mohin, Mohini. She enchants the asuras and takes the pot from them. The asuras, being asuras, they get enchanted by beauty of this kind. There's beauty in everything, and asuras, the gods, get enchanted by a different kind of beauty. These guys get enchanted by a different kind of beauty. It's all part of ourselves. So we should keep that in context. We're talking always of the sun.
The sun, and the sun is that beauty.
Of the psyche, sorry. All of this confusion is coming from the psyche.
Gotcha.
Sun itself is just a different theme which needs to be spoken of in a different way.
Thank you for clarifying.
A demon named Swarbhanu recognizes Vishnu's deceit. When all the gods line up to receive the nectar, this demon transforms himself into a god. So now we see Rahu's has this, both Rahu and Ketu have this capacity to transform themselves into things.
And to seem like a god.
To seem like a god, or to seem like a demon, or to seem like something that they're not.
Certainly.
Right? And when the nectar is served to Swarbhanu, the sun and moon illuminate the truth of the matter. But Swarbhanu has already received a drop of the nectar.
Right.
So it's just touched the tip of the tongue and it gets absorbed into the body, and now nothing can. It's too late. It's the arrow has left the bow.
Nice.
Mohini transforms back into Vishnu, and with a disc chops off Swarbhanu's head. Right. So the head of the demon becomes Rahu, the tail Ketu.
Right. And this
Mohini comes back into its Vishnu form and gets his, and this discus has a very, very symbolic, a very deep meaning. We'll move into the next slide and I'll talk about what it exactly is.
Wonderful.
So now we had a demon called Swarbhanu who could see through the illusion of the gods.
Right.
And got the nectar of immortality. And now it's eternalized, and that eternalization has led them to become Rahu and Ketu, which don't go away. They don't. If you are born on Earth, you have a Rahu and Ketu in your chart, no matter what. No matter what, you have to have it.
It's a very psychedelic story. So we could see that really the gods in here, in some ways, we could see them again as virtues and as the important aspects of ourself, and even important aspects of the sun that are rooted in there. And what has happened is that the churning of the ocean of consciousness has created a nectar, an immortality, which the gods are meant to imbibe, because it's really the goodness and it's the positive nature of virtue and of the pure beauty and light of the sun and of the self that creates the Amrita. But the Asuras are a part of this perfection. And what has happened is that the demon Svarbhanu, when he noticed that Vishnu was giving the nectar of immortality to the gods while distracting the Asuras, Svarbhanu is this particular part of the Asuras, which has caused the entanglement, because that's the one Asura, the one aspect of ourselves that was allowed to become entangled with the beauty of the sun that we are.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Beautiful.
I just wanted to clarify that for everybody who's
that's beautiful.
part of the story.
That's something very subtle that you've picked up. Exactly, right? And that tells us something so profound about Rahu and Ketu's character also, as we study Rahu and Ketu more. It's that thing that's the thing that allows us to see through the illusion of time. Right. It is time itself.
Right.
So now astronomically, these are the nodes of the moon, right? Cool. That is the point at which the equatorial plane of moon, the orbital path of the moon, intersects the ecliptic the plane formed by sun's apparent motion around Earth. So there's Earth, there's moon going around Earth, and there's sun going around Earth when we're looking from our local space.
Right.
We have that
The
ecliptic
geocentric
path,
position.
and they're both tilted at a 5.1 degree angle, and they intersect because of that angle. If they were at the same path, they wouldn't intersect at 2 points. They intersect. The northern intersection, the north node is Rahu. The southern intersection is the south node, Ketu. So Rahu and Ketu take their revenge by eclipsing the sun and the moon, thus robbing them of their authority and power by creating confusion. So if you have moon and Rahu, if you have sun and Rahu, if you have Ketu moon, Ketu sun, you don't know who you are. You have to go through a process of development with your consciousness. It's a huge, it's very beautiful. If you can step into it consciously through the study of Jyotisha especially, this is by far the greatest self-help material one can find, the most divinely informed self-help material that one can have, is to develop their consciousness, stabilize their psyche, their moon, stabilize themselves into the sun by understanding the nature of the sun, Rahu, what's happening in the karmic material.
And the nature of the entanglement, especially for those, if I'm reading you correctly, for anyone who has Rahu with the sun or moon, or anyone who has Ketu with the sun or moon, knowing that from a Jyotish astrological perspective is some of the greatest, it's one of the greatest things that you can do to untangle the nature of that entanglement.
100%, because one of the key words for Rahu is tamo, darkness, and avidya, ignorance. The whole point is to understand that my Rahu is with my moon. Essentially, that's what's going on. And the moment I've had clients who've had a great moment of like enlightenment about their nature, like, whoa, like exactly how I've been formed this way. So every eclipse is essentially a reenactment of this part of the entire tale.
Right.
So this part is being reenacted. That tale is being retold astronomically.
All the time, really, every time there's an eclipse.
There's an eclipse. Every time we are looking at Rahu, every time you're born with moon and Rahu, you're going through this Swarbhanu stage. And you see here in the image, we have Vishnu, who has this radiant solar power behind its head, which is symbolic of its divinity. It's all-seeing, objective vision of the entire cosmos itself. And we have it throwing its discus, and this discus is called Sudarshana Chakra. And actually, we'll talk about it later, but the discus is the ecliptic. Sun's path around Earth is the Sudarshana Chakra, and it's chopping off this head of this demon. And in Indian temples, if you go to some of the Navgraha temples, we have a lot of Navgraha temples, very beautiful temples. You will see Rahu and Ketu's sculptures.
The headless body and the bodiless
headless
head.
body, and like you'll see like some something with the tail of a fish and stuff like that. Meena avatar and avatars like that. It's very interesting.
Certainly.
So then now we move to the next part, which is the symbolic significance of the tale, right? So here we have, I'll just move us to this side of the screen.
Thank you very much.
And we have this image where we see the asuras churning the ocean of consciousness. And we see all these objects come out. We have Dhanvantri here with the pot. We have Chandra, which Shiva puts on his head. We have Halahal, which is the poison that Shiva has to... that's why this tale is the most important, because Shiva in India is very commonly known as Neelkant. Neelakant Kantha meaning your throat. Neela means blue. So because he swallowed this poison so that the creation doesn't get destroyed. So when we churn the ocean of consciousness, these objects come out. We have Kamdhenu, the wish-fulfilling cow, and that's why cows are supremely important in an agricultural society of any kind, not just India. And if you can slash a being's throat after it has fed you, right, with its own milk, and if you can slash that, there's something wrong with your prefrontal cortex. There's either something wrong, or it's just disconnect. There's just this emotional disconnect.
A misunderstanding of
a misunderstanding. There's this avidya, some sort of ignorance.
Very good. Very good. I love that, Sachin. That's a great point to add.
There's a little bit of veganism going on there.
Yeah. Ecological consciousness. That's
ecological consciousness.
I love that.
And then we have Lakshmi, who's Vishnu's consort. We use the word consort a lot. Basically, Vishnu's wife, and or partner. Wife is on an earthly sense is a different meaning here, but more like a opposing polarity.
Yeah, the left hand to Vishnu's right hand.
Yeah, like that. Lakshmi being the goddess of fortune. We have all these different apsaras coming out, beautiful women who the Gandharvas, the musicians, take for themselves. So the Gandharvas are the musicians, and the musicians get all the good the female goddesses. Let's call them goddesses. We have Amrit, which Dhanvantri is holding this. Dhanvantri comes out with this pot. It's this Amrit. We have this wish-fulfilling tree. So we have all these different things that come out, right? We have this Uchcha Shrava. I think that's how you say Uchcha Shrava. These are the seven horses, which I think Bali takes with him. One of the, so I think Bali takes it or Indra takes it. I'm not sure. But in any case, so we have all these symbols coming out, right? And it's so rich. All of a sudden, it's phenomenally rich because each of these symbols have a tale of them for themselves. Certainly. And every tale has a great deep psychological meaning in your own lifetime. So it's extremely rich.
And this is really a central myth in Indian literature for this reason.
Yeah. And even like when Rahu is getting, when Swarbhanu is getting the drop of Amrita, 4 of these drops fell on different parts of India, and they created the 4 places where the Kumbh Mela happens.
Very interesting.
Kumbh meaning pot.
Yep.
It's where the water was caught, the Amrita was caught. So 4 parts. I think it's Haridwar, Ujjain, Prayagraj, and Nashik. I think.
Okay. Dang,
these 4 places, it's where these massive sort of yogis from everywhere, all spiritual aspirants come, and they say if you go to that place, you get moksha and stuff. There are all sorts of beliefs. So it's very symbolic, very deep. It means a lot to Indian psyche.
Wonderful.
So we have these symbols, and do you still see the presentation? Because I've switched this.
Yep.
So now we have, first of all, the tale starts with Indra, right? I didn't bring up Indra. That's where the tale starts from. Indra is at the center of most of the chaos that happens. Like Indra ends up doing something which pisses someone off. And then there's this huge series of events that happen that creates drama.
Classic Indra.
Classic Indra. So Indra, again, he does something. That's where it starts. We have that symbol, which means something, but I think it'll be better to stick to exactly Swarbhanu. So for the churning of this ocean, this Vasuki, this particular snake is very important because this snake represents our spine.
So what was it you said?
The spine.
The spine. Thank you. Very good.
That's the let's call it, that's the thing that we push and pull on.
Right.
Right. So spine is that keeps us erect.
Yes.
On a biological level, this is what makes us human.
Mm.
Right. This is what makes us look further. It helps us see dangers and stuff. This is what is very important in yogic processes, keeping the spine straight in certain ways.
It's really very symbolically significant in my mind because, like really, they say the lower chakras of the spine have to do with like baser, gross needs in the human consciousness. And then once you get past, really the Muladhara chakra, you've got the heart chakra, you've got the throat, and then you've got the head, and you've got the realm of samadhi and the devas and this sort of thing. So really, maybe that area of the Muladhara and the heart is that central pillar, which is being squeezed on between the two poles.
Exactly that. That's it. And so then we have this churning of the ocean itself. It's symbolic of life. So what we call life is, as from the psychical perspective, with our own shadows and all kinds of sketchy stuff that goes on, that is our ocean, churning of ocean of consciousness. The churning is not fun. You're just being you're just being churned around, right? Grind. You're in a constant state of grind. The life in and of itself is the process of churning, where our light side, our light, and our shadows, our dark side, have a battle. That's the gods and the demigods, suras, asuras. Through this battle, through this churning, consciousness learns about itself.
Wonderful.
As you had stated before. So Rahu and Ketu's hasn't entered the picture yet. But the whole drama of life itself is teaching us about ourselves.
Right.
So when you become conscious, when you start doing psychotherapeutic work on the level of the moon and meditative work on the level of the sun, you start dealing with a lot of things that you couldn't deal with before. You start finding the courage. You start finding understanding. You start finding forgiveness. You give yourself time to grieve. You give yourself time to say things that you haven't said and allow others to say things. So that whole process of the light and the shadow or dark side, shadow is not necessarily the dark side. Shadow is just the hidden side. So light and the dark side, that's the process of the churning of the consciousness.
Wonderful.
Then we have Dhanvantari. Dhanvantari is very interesting because Dhanvantari is also the god of Ayurveda. Right? So Dhanvantari is taken by the gods. Dhanvantari is a physician of the gods.
Right.
When gods fall off their skateboards, they go to Dhanvantari for fixing their wounds.
Right.
So Dhanvantari is basically going through that process of self-healing. It's our own inner physician.
Holistic healing in that sort of way.
Our own motivation to find healing is the Dhanvantari in our own psyche.
I love it. Wonderful way to connect that.
And according to that, to what degree our own Dhanvantari is, inner Dhanvantari is developed, will be the level of Dhanvantari that we'll meet externally. So if our inner Dhanvantari is really big on pharmaceutical drugs and all kinds of quick fix pills, then we find external Dhanvantaris who would give us exactly that. So it's just an outer manifestation of all these symbols.
Right. Okay, very good.
Then we have, okay, got a glimpse of the next slide. But for that, we go into Surya and Chandra are pointing out at Swarbhanu. This is very significant. This is a very significant event that happens in the tale. At some point, sun and the moon are like, okay, that's not one of us.
Right. So this is in the tale where Swarbhanu has gone to snatch the Amrita, and it does get a little bit of it. And the sun and the moon as deities, as one of the gods, they notice, because all the other asuras are supposed to be getting distracted, but Swarbhanu has seen through it and went for the Amrita. And it's the sun and the moon that recognized, hey, somebody else who's not on our side has taken the Amrita.
So that's very, very symbolic, because ultimately, the thing that breaks the ignorance of Rahu and Ketu, the compulsions of Rahu and Ketu, all the karmic material that's coming up and creating all sorts of confusion within our psyche, is broken by the self and the moon. So when we start meditating and we start doing yogic practices and we start moving towards the sun, we start seeing we start seeing Swarbhanu for who he is. We start seeing that that's not one of us. This path that I'm so compulsively trying to walk on, and probably will walk on regardless of me realizing it, is not who I am actually.
This is so good, Sachin. I think this is important because I think many people read into seeing Rahu in conjunction with, say, Mars or Mercury or any other graha. And many astrologers are inclined to try and adapt or fix the life or tell the person things that might have to do with Rahu and Mars. And at some level, that's true. But really what needs to be done is that the consciousness needs to come into meditation for the moon and realization through the sun in order to realize that what is going on with Rahu and Mars, or whatever that is not an essential part of who I am, although I have to move through that karma in this life.
Perfect. Yeah.
It's an important distinction to make.
Very important. Very, very important. And you'd see that the moment you start throwing light, shedding light upon Rahu, Mars starts to develop a little bit more. Right? So you see this sort of Rahu over-exaggerates itself. Right? So Elon Musk's Mars Rahu, he even said, like, so someone said it's suicide. Like, if you try to go to Mars for the first time, he's like, we all have things that we are willing to die for.
Very interesting.
That's really intense, right? That's a very
intense.
Like it's as a soldier, he's speaking of a mission. It's the mission of his life, and he's like, I'm willing to go to an extreme into Rahu, outer space, to find my Mars.
Yeah. Is it Elon Musk? Is that who you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yes, gotcha. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah. So that's so significant, because essentially, and he's on that path, and too many arrows have left too many bows, and I don't think that process can be stopped now. The convictions are stronger than anything. And yeah, if he becomes conscious of something within the self, he'd probably be meditating on his way to Mars, or doing chanting mantra on his way to Mars before. I hope it lands well.
And hopefully finding a way to find a full self-realization, so that maybe he can embark on his thing and really go as far and as close as he can without ultimately actually killing himself in the process. You never know with Rahu.
You never know with Rahu. And that's another thing about Rahu. You never know.
Yep.
So we'll come to that. We'll come to that in the next slide. But for now, then we have Surya and Chandra pointing out that, this is not one of us. So we discussed that. And now we have the severing of the head of Swarbhanu with the discus of Vishnu. The disc of Vishnu, the Sudarshana Chakra, severs off the head of Swarbhanu. That disc is the ecliptic plane of the sun, slicing moon's orbit. So that's why it's the north and the south node of the moon. Which means if you are on Mars, there will be a sun's ecliptic plane around Mars, and if Mars has a moon, the conjunction between Mars's moon and sun's ecliptic plane would create a north and the south node for Martians.
Right. Wow.
So there's a nodes with every planet.
Right.
Here on Earth, it's relevant to us because we have life here, and we moon, there's a psyche, and things have life is
It's
flourished
related to
here.
human consciousness. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And now we have so we have this astronomical detail which really shakes hands, not just rubs shoulders, but shakes hands with the astrological symbolic things. We have this astronomically, we are like entering into something symbolic. So the as within, as above, so below sort of becomes more real than before through this astronomical stuff.
It's important to know the astronomy of anything, so we can see the math, which we can then interpret symbolically. But you can't go the other way.
Yeah, and you can't go the other way. That's the first principles thinking. Like, what do we know to be true as a fact? And that's why this Rahu Ketu stuff has been making so much sense to me, and I've been like really digging deep with it.
Yeah, I love it.
Now we have Swarbhanu's intelligence of seeing through Vishnu's cosmic play and deceit for whichever higher purpose, but deceit nonetheless. So Vishnu did what he did for a higher purpose. That's we call it in Sanskrit niti. That was the plan, the divine plan, the ordering principle. That's a very commonly understood idea in India, like very commonly understood. So Rahu can
get with the program.
It's programmed into the psyche, Indian psyche, especially the old school psyche. The newer, like the millennials, are like in resistance to this sort of stuff mostly.
Right. Yes, I understand.
It's pretty good like that. Otherwise, so Rahu can indeed, if strong, can allow one to see through the illusions of time. So if you have a strong Rahu, you'll see through the illusions of time and make one see that which is beyond name, shape, and form, what we call Nama Roop. So if you have, especially if there is a Jupiter. So because Jupiter is the only Graha which has its own light. So they found out that the amount of light that Jupiter absorbs is lesser than the amount of light that it deflects back.
Interesting.
So they figured out that Jupiter has its own light. And then they figured out, they have these theories where they said Jupiter could have been a star in itself. Or it could have had its own system around itself. It has so much gravity. 1,000 Earths can fit into one Jupiter.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting symbolism coming out about Jupiter, even in modern astronomy. What they say is that the sun itself actually has a little bit of a flub. It's got a little bit of a wobble and a waver, and it's being caused by Jupiter.
It's called the barycenter. It's a little bit of a thing. It's called a barycenter.
Right.
And the only planet that has an influence on the soul is Jupiter.
Right.
It has such a pull that it actually moves sun from its place and creates a little movement, a revolution sort of. Like a little revolution, a little circle within its own orbit.
Gotcha.
So now we have the next one, the planetary status of Rahu and Ketu due to their immortality, right? And their subsequent revenge from the sun and the moon by eclipsing them.
Because they did get the Amrita.
So now they astronomically it's happening because whenever that mathematical point aligns with sun and earth and moon, it either hides the moon, it either blocks the moon, or it blocks in a lunar eclipse, or it blocks the sun. It blocks the moon or it blocks the sun. So it either takes a revenge from the moon or the sun. This is not revenge. This is evolution. This revenge comes from medieval fear.
Wonderful.
Rahu and Ketu are Swarbhanu. Rahu's avatar is Varaha. Varaha is
Mm,
Paramatman consciousness. If there is no Rahu, there is no evolution of consciousness.
certainly.
It's
Certainly.
the urge. Otherwise, you go into cyclic madness. If things don't break down, you wouldn't improve upon them.
Certainly. And life is continuing eternally. And it
So we
has to
need
move
that
through
friction.
this. Yeah.
We have to. It's moving eternally, and it seeks to move upward.
So this is one of those fascinating stories where in Indian literature it happens a lot, where what we see as a villain, Vishnu was there from the beginning, and we know Vishnu knew who Svarbhanu was. Vishnu knows all. It has the timeless sense, but Vishnu allowed this story to unfold. And so most people see Rahu and Ketu as being this evil thing, and it's a villain in the story, but it's just like our own karma is a villain in our own story, but it is at the same time the very thing which allows us to have the retribution and reintegration of the spirit and the soul.
Exactly. Yeah. And it see now it we can fathom it, but when push comes to shove and shit goes down in our lives, it's very hard to embrace this truth. Right?
Yes.
To keep this objectivity that when you see like let's say an autocrat of some sort take 1 million lives, what's the plan there?
Yeah.
What god is that? So that's the thing, right? It's very difficult to get to that place,
Yes.
especially when one gets involved oneself, when these sorts of things fall on one's own head directly. It's a whole new game. So we need to keep that in perspective, that these sorts of stories and these things are being intellectually grasped really well, and these symbols are really beautiful in that way. But there's a very high chance of spiritually bypassing a psyche. So going into too much of a solar perspective through soul-based astrology, and then losing perspective of moon and what it needs to go through, and staying empathetic, compassionate, and relatable.
And open.
So that sort of stuff is really it's very important to mention, actually.
Wonderful.
So, but also Rahu and Ketu create confusion and chaos when conjunct with other grahas. So we don't want them with other grahas, ideally. But if they're there because we need to work on those grahas. They're a very big part of our lives. That's where we find ourselves run into some sort of good thing or a bad thing. It can be either. So there's always a peculiarity, a specific life path that is carved out due to how the planetary kingdom is altered by Rahu and Ketu's influence.
And no matter what, whether it brings good things or bad things, it's ultimately still an illusion.
It's ultimately still an illusion. It's just a state of like conviction. You just like when you see someone going at it with a certain fanaticism, and when you've sort of studied philosophy for like 20 years and you've come to this objective space, you see this madness within their assertions, and you also have this empathy that okay, they're really convinced with that thing that really bothered them on some deep level, and now they've identified with that thing. It's their self concept and their self have become the same thing. So
very
that's
interesting.
that's when we know like there is some sort of
Entanglement, I guess, would be a good word there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the word.
Yeah.
So these are some of the symbols. We have many more symbols in this tale, but these are relevant to Swarbhanu specifically. Then we have the Amrita, which is the main thing. And yeah, that's the main last symbol that I want to touch upon. So this Amrita is the Amrit. You can call it elixir. It's different levels and different degrees of Amrita can be produced. So there's an Amrita gets produced when you work out, when you have a good workout.
Right.
There's an Amrita gets produced when you give a good astrological session and your client actually feels better. Then there's an Amrita that gets produced when you on a spiritual level, whatever, like whatever meditative stuff that people talk
Right.
about. So I don't get into that too much.
Yes.
But there's a sense, it's a feeling of bliss. But the Amrita that they were seeking was Amrita which gives power to Devas over Asuras. So Amrita is a reward that makes a good side feel good about itself. So it gets strengthened and it feels encouraged. It's encouragement. It's this B.F. Skinner's thing where if you're rewarded, Pavlov's dog or B.F. Skinner's guinea pigs. Like if you're rewarded continuously, you enforce a behavior.
Interesting.
So Amrita, so when you enforce good behavior, you embolden devas, and the devas eventually are also an illusion, but the devas are the ladder that you step on to get on top of the mountain.
I see.
On the terrace. But eventually, even the devas are as good as the asuras. I mean, golden shackles or iron shackles.
Both shackles.
But it's more preferable to have a golden shackles made out of gold.
It's like sattva.
Yeah. So we have
Wonderful.
That thing, and then we use the Amrita to embrace. And Amrita, if some of us, so this tale, in this particular tale, the Devas got the Amrita. But in our subjective tales, sometimes the Amrita is received by the demons.
I understand. You know, I love the Pavlov's dog metaphor. There's a wonderful writing in the Christian Bible where Jesus is, he's a man comes to him, and Jesus, everybody knows that Jesus is the symbol of Christ who can produce miracles. He's almost Vishnu and Krishna in the Christian sense. So someone comes to him and says, I'm thirsty. Could you give me something to drink? And Jesus says, if you drink the water from any well, you will always be thirsty again. But if you drink the water of the Christ consciousness, you will never be thirsty again. And this is similar to the Amrita.
Exactly.
If you're drinking the Amrita, and especially if the Devas, the real virtuous, true aspects of yourself, are allowed to have the Amrita, you will be thirsty for that. And if you're not thirsty for that, then you're thirsty for the other thing. Another great line.
The well or the water in the drain. It depends.
Right. Exactly. You'll be drinking mud to get at the water. Another phrase this is Bob Dylan. I love just thinking of lines like this. Bob Dylan wrote a song and he says, if you're not busy being born, then you're busy dying.
Okay. Exactly. Beautiful. Nice. It gives me goosebumps.
I feel it. I know exactly what you mean.
Love it. So we have all these beautiful symbols, and you can dig in, like the viewers the audience can dig into these symbols in their free time, and it's really profound how deep these go. Then we have, I'll move us on this side of the screen.
Yep.
Now we have the practical implications of the tale. So here we have an image of